Hey everyone, the book study group finished week 2 of God's Big Picture Study while I was on vacation last week. And chapter 2 is on the perished kingdom. If you remember through our study, if you've been studying at home or if you've been here with us studying, that the book is on God's kingdom throughout the scripture. So it starts with God's kingdom pictured, which is in Genesis 1 and 2, that God created all things good with intention, where He is the king and His people are His people, and that creation has beautiful rhythms in it meant to serve God's people, and that they would have dominion over their creation, and that there would be perfect harmony and relationship between all of God's creation, between God and humans, between the man and the woman, and between the humans and creation itself, there was perfect harmony and that God created it good. Well, this last week, the discussion was on chapter 2, which is the perished kingdom. And the focus was on Genesis chapter 3, where Adam and Eve were deceived by the serpent and that they disobeyed God's kingdom rule of eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that by doing so, all of God's good creation was fractured by their disobedience. And that God still ruled as king, but instead of ruling his people with blessing, that then he is ruling them by his judgment. So a bit of recap from the book in highlighting the perished kingdom. I just want to read a paragraph for you here. It says that the perfect creation that God had established is now nothing but a distant dream. The pattern of the kingdom has been destroyed by sin. Human beings are no longer God's people by nature. We have turned away from him. We no longer live in his place. We have been banished from the garden, and we reject his rule and live as if we ruled the world. God continues to reign, but he reigns in judgment. As a result, we do not enjoy God's blessing, but instead face his curse. It's all so sad. A perfect world has been destroyed by human rebellion. And this idea of God's kingdom is shown here in Genesis 3 as broken, as fractured. That the book defines God's kingdom as God's people in God's place with his rule and blessing. And so God's people, Adam and Eve, have rebelled against him, and they're no longer allowed in his presence. They got kicked out of the garden. And so they're not his people, and they're not in his place in the garden, and they're no longer under his rule and blessing, but instead all of creation is cursed. And we see this play out in Genesis with Adam and Eve all of a sudden at enmity with each other, jockeying for control in their marriage. We see brothers killing one another, Cain and Abel. We see death now in the scene. Over and over in Genesis, this person comes and this person dies. This person comes and this person dies. And that should be shocking to us when we read that, because none of that was part of God's initial kingdom plan. But because of rebellion, death comes in. Next week, we'll get into chapter 3. So on April 17th, if you want to come with us or if you're studying from home, we're going to be in chapter 3 in God's Big Picture. And the kingdom focus here is the promised kingdom. That actually, oftentimes we think of the fall as a reaction or plan B of God's kingdom. But we see here that God actually intended from before creation that this would happen. And now there's some wrestles there, but the Bible doesn't ultimately give us all the answers we want, but it tells us what we need to get back in restored relationship with God, and that God is king, and that he is ruled from the beginning, and he has written people's names in the book of life from before the foundations of the world, and that this promised kingdom shows that in spite of human sin and rebellion, that God still has a plan for his kingdom, and that actually the rest of the scriptures show us him building out and picturing and showing and proclaiming his kingdom come ultimately till his kingdom is perfected, as we see in Revelation, where we will be his people and he will be our God in perfect unity, and the tears will be wiped from our eyes, and all of creation will be restored. But now we live in a broken world with broken relationships. Creation no longer provides and sustains us as it should. Our relationships with one another, with humans, are not as they should be. And ultimately, our relationship with God is distant and broken. but God does not stay there. He would have been right to, but the rest of this book and scripture itself shows his initiating plan and his kingdom, that this king is a king that comes and pursues rebellious, broken people and gives us a way to be back into his relationship with him. So I would really encourage any of you to, if you haven't yet, pick up the book, read it at home, come join us next Wednesday, April 17th from 6:30 to 8 to discuss chapter 3. And the promised kingdom that God from the very beginning, from the very start of human rebellion and sin, has already been working in a plan to redeem the people back to himself, and that his kingdom would be shown throughout the scriptures and throughout the world and in our hearts as his people. I look forward to seeing many of you there, and let me know if you're following at home and have questions or want to engage. I can help you engage on the online app that we have where we can join in conversation there. Hope you have a good one.